So this is the video I was asked to make by a number of people, just really to talk about the situation with regards money in relation to the current lockdown and how the government could continue to provide universal basic income, and that our concerns about it and its longevity are based on perhaps a misunderstanding of how money works. The description I gave to a few friends was in relation to the game of Monopoly that a lot of people are very familiar with. In the game of Monopoly, all players are equal, but one player will start the game by volunteering to be the banker. Now, the person who volunteers to be the banker doesn't get any competitive advantage within the game at all. They're merely providing a function. And their first function kicks off the game, which is to give every single player 1,500 Monopoly units to start the game. Now, those players didn't do anything at all to earn that 1,500. They just volunteered to play the game. And so by right of playing the game, they get 1,500. Every time they pass go, the banker will give them another 200, not because that's defined as work or effort, or all they're really doing is throwing the dice, but because they've survived. They've survived one whole round without going bankrupt. So there's a reward, 200 every year for surviving a whole new year. So we understand that's how Monopoly works. That's where we get the money from in the game of Monopoly. The use of the money in the game of Monopoly is to allow property transactions to take place and for properties to be developed. So people can trade within Monopoly if there's sufficient cash to enable them to trade, if they have sufficient cash to purchase property, sufficient cash to purchase houses and hotels. They get the money to enable them to do that as the money supply increases as the game progresses. The more people pass go, the more money is added to the game. Occasionally, community chest and chance cards also add additional money to the game. Money is also taken out of the game with community chest and chance cards and fines. It's not taken out of the game when somebody pays rent. When somebody pays rent, the money stays on the board. It just moves to a different player. At the end of the game of Monopoly, the winner is the person who controls the entire board, who has a monopoly on the entire board. That is, they own all the value on the board, all the value of all the properties and any houses or hotels that have been built. And usually by the end game, there's a hotel on every square owned by the monopolist who's just won the game. They do not win the game of Monopoly because they've got the most amount of money. At the end of the game, the banker still has the most amount of money, easily. If the banker ran out of actual notes to give out, Monopoly notes, they could just go and buy a second game and take the notes from that. The money is an infinite supply. The money's just there to help the players transact, to trade, and to develop their properties. And the amount of money on the board shared between all the players increases as time goes on because there's more economic activity and more money has been injected at cyclical points in order to allow the game to continue to its conclusion and hopefully victory for somebody. Well, victory for the monopolist. So that's the role that money plays in the game of Monopoly. It's not the value in and of itself. Technically, I suppose you could win a game of Monopoly with only one unit of Monopoly cash, provided you held the monopoly on all the property on the board. That may or may not be possible. But the point is, it's not the money that wins you the game. It's owning all the value and controlling all the value by monopoly on the game. Now, you could imagine what the situation would be if somebody who volunteered to be banker took 500 for themselves every time they gave a player 100. At the end of the game, which would come about pretty quickly, the banker would own all the property because they would have had enough monopoly currency to give in exchange for it, unless the people selling the property, trading the property, refuse to take the monopoly money. That obviously then would break that when they say, well, no, actually, there's so much money now, there's so much monopoly money washing around the board that you couldn't buy Old Kent Road for 20,000. At which point everyone recognises that something has gone wrong with the banker, and perhaps it's a good idea to let somebody else be the banker, reset everything, and start the game again. Otherwise, you just sit there arguing with the bankers about why the bankers aren't wrong and why no, it's just perfectly normal function of money, and don't try to understand it because it's really complicated and it's got really complex names. Just accept that there's a lot of money sloshing around, and most of you are defined by how much you owe rather than how much you own. So that hopefully is the explanation of monopoly money. Obviously, we're talking about trying to reduce something that has been deliberately made incredibly complex by people who work in the money markets and have a natural instinct to protect their position in those financial markets by keeping competition to an absolute minimum. So therefore, the idea is not really to have too many people understanding how the markets work. That's kind of built in. So reducing all of that to something as simple as monopoly may seem trite, and I'm sure lots of people could point out inaccuracies in it. But in terms of unlocking our understanding of the function that money is supposed to play in our lives, monopoly is as good an example as any.